On May 10, 2025, something happened that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Inside the Kremlin in Moscow, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young interim leader of Burkina Faso, stood face to face with President Vladimir Putin. Cameras recorded the handshake, but for millions across Africa it was more than a gesture. It was a signal that the balance of power in the Sahel might be changing. This was not a quiet meeting behind closed doors. It was official, public, and deliberate. The Kremlin itself confirmed it. From that meeting came promises that went beyond speeches. A month later, in June 2025, Burkina Faso signed a civil nuclear cooperation agreement with Russia at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. This deal, formally announced by Rosatom, outlined plans for training Burkinabè engineers, improving safety standards, and applying nuclear technology for healthcare and agriculture. For a nation where hospitals still struggle with basic medicine, the idea of using nuclear isotopes to diagnose disease felt like a glimpse into a very different future. The defense side of the partnership also grew. In August 2025, the Alliance of Sahel States, which includes Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, met with Russian defense officials in the first joint military coordination meeting of its kind. Reports described the talks as a turning point, with discussions on training and potential equipment support for the people of Burkina Faso, who have long seen foreign troops stationed on their soil without bringing lasting security. This appeared to be something new. It was an alliance on their own terms, not dictated by Paris or Washington. To the average citizen in Ouagadougou, these announcements meant hope. A retired schoolteacher might imagine his grandchildren studying in classrooms built with new funds. A farmer might wonder whether new roads, promised under Russian-backed investment, would finally allow his crops to reach markets before they spoil. To many, Traoré's trip to Moscow looked like the first real step toward breaking the cycle of dependency. But every promise carries a question. Deals signed in glowing halls are one thing. Turning them into bricks, medicine, and security is another. The world is now asking, what exactly did Traoré bring back? And what was only political theater? When Ibrahim Traoré returned from Moscow, his words were filled with fire. He told his people that he had not come back with empty promises, but with treasures that the West never wanted Africans to touch. The heart of his message was that Burkina Faso had secured billions of dollars in investment. To a country where per capita income is less than $2 a day, the idea of billions arriving for roads, schools, hospitals, and industries sounded almost unbelievable. Yet Traoré insisted that these resources would not be stolen before they touched the soil. He declared they would be planted like seeds, watered by the sweat of ordinary citizens, and harvested by future generations. For ordinary people, this vision mattered because daily life has been defined by scarcity. A grandmother in Koudougou remembers raising her children in classrooms without proper roofs, where rain poured onto their notebooks. When she hears about schools with desks, books, and teachers equipped with the right tools, she imagines a different future for her grandchildren. A mother in a rural village has seen 2 children die because there was no hospital nearby, and medicine was absent. For her, the promise of new hospitals is not just politics, but a matter of life and death. The promises extended beyond social programs. Traoré said that Burkina Faso would no longer export raw cotton and gold, only to buy back expensive shirts and jewelry from abroad. Instead, industries would rise inside the country. Cotton would be turned into clothes, and gold into jewelry. This meant jobs for the youth, dignity for the workers, and a stronger economy that no longer bled wealth to foreign capitals. There is truth behind this dream. In April 2025, the government announced new rules to expand state control over mines, and Russian companies like Nordgold received licenses to operate. These steps suggest that industrial transformation may not be just rhetoric. The most dramatic part of Traoré's announcement was about defense. He told his people that Russia had placed advanced air defense systems in their hands. According to his speech, this would ensure that the skies of Burkina Faso could no longer be used as a free playground for foreign drones and bombers. He went further, promising that fighter jets would soon take off from African soil, not to serve NATO or France, but to defend Burkina Faso and the Sahel. To the farmer in a northern province, often living under the shadow of armed groups and occasional foreign air operations, this sounded like a shield for his children's future. However, this claim requires careful reflection. As of September 2025, no official Russian or Burkinabè source has confirmed the delivery of air defense systems or fighter jets. Analysts suggest these statements may be political theater meant to boost morale and signal strength, rather than evidence of weapons already on the ground. Still, the fact that the Alliance of Sahel states held its first military coordination meeting with Russia in August 2025 is real and signals growing defense ties. When combined with the confirmed deliveries of Chinese armored vehicles earlier the same summer, the message is clear. Burkina Faso is modernizing its military, whether the air defense systems are in place yet or not. For the people of Burkina Faso, the emotional impact may matter more than the technical details. A retired soldier in Ouagadougou put it simply, "For once, we feel someone is trying to protect us, not control us." His words capture the deep hunger for dignity and self-defense that has long been denied. Traoré also framed his Moscow trip as a rejection of the West's model of aid. He accused Western nations of giving loans with strings attached, loans that returned tenfold to their banks and corporations. He pointed to empty schools, broken hospitals, and powerless villages as evidence that so-called aid was designed to maintain dependency. For an older American audience, this echoes memories of the Cold War, when development aid often carried political agendas. The difference now is that a small West African country is speaking openly about choosing alternative partners, and doing so in defiance of Washington and Paris. The core event of Traoré's Russia visit, then, was not just about agreements and signatures. It was about rewriting the narrative of who gets to decide Africa's future. It was about telling citizens that their destiny will no longer be dictated by foreign capitals. But promises are easy to make, and reality is harder to deliver. The next question is whether these billions and these defense commitments will truly transform Burkina Faso, or whether they will remain as fiery words in a speech. The world is now asking, will these bold declarations become real bricks, medicines, and jobs, or will they fade as another dream deferred? The climax of Ibrahim Traoré's Moscow speech was not only about money or even about air defense. It came when he revealed something that sent ripples across the globe. He announced that Vladimir Putin, the man who stood against NATO sanctions and fought to preserve Russia's influence, would soon set foot in Burkina Faso. This was more than a diplomatic claim. For his supporters, it was a statement that Burkina Faso, long dismissed as a poor and landlocked nation, had entered the stage of world politics. The reaction inside Burkina Faso was immediate and emotional. Crowds in Ouagadougou filled the streets, waving national flags and chanting slogans of independence. To many citizens, the thought of Putin visiting their soil was almost unthinkable. For a retired miner who had spent his life working under foreign companies that stripped Burkina Faso of its gold, this announcement felt like vindication. For once, he said, they will come to us not to take but to stand with us. And his words captured the pride that ordinary people felt. Pride that their nation could finally command attention. Yet the reactions were not only about pride. There was also fear and uncertainty. Older Burkinabè who lived through the coups and assassinations of past decades remembered what happened to leaders who challenged Western powers. Thomas Sankara was killed in 1987. Patrice Lumumba in 1961, Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Traoré himself reminded his people of these names, turning history into a warning. For many mothers and fathers, the question was not only about national pride, but about survival. Could their leader escape the fate of those who came before him? International reactions were equally charged. In Washington, analysts warned that Russia was using the Sahel as a new platform to expand influence, just as the Soviet Union once sought allies in Africa during the Cold War. In Paris, media outlets portrayed Traoré as reckless, claiming he was pushing Burkina Faso into dependency on Moscow. European diplomats quietly admitted their fear that if Putin truly visited Ouagadougou, it would symbolize a collapse of Western dominance in West Africa. They saw not just one country moving away from the West, but a wave of defiance spreading across the region. This fear was not imaginary. In January 2025, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger had already withdrawn from ECOWAS, the regional bloc long backed by Western powers. By August, they were meeting directly with Russian defense officials, forming what they called the Alliance of Sahel States. These steps showed that Traoré's words were not isolated. They were part of a larger pattern of rejection, one that stretched beyond Burkina Faso. When Mali declared new mining deals, when Niger expelled foreign troops, when Guinea resisted IMF conditions, each move fed the perception of a rising anti-colonial tide. For ordinary Africans, especially the young, these changes were inspiring. A student in Bamako told a journalist, "If Burkina Faso can stand up, why not us?" That simple question showed why Western capitals were alarmed. Resistance spreads like fire. Once one country says no, others begin to question why they remain tied to old systems. Still, skepticism lingers. Western commentators argue that promises of billions and of advanced weapons may never materialize. They point to Africa's long history of leaders making fiery speeches while citizens continued to live in poverty. They ask whether Russia, facing its own economic struggles, can truly deliver the scale of investment Traoré described. For older American viewers, these doubts resonate. Many remember hearing similar speeches during the Cold War that raised hopes, but delivered little. The clash of emotions is what makes this moment so dramatic. On one side, there is hope, pride, and the dream of dignity. On the other side, there is fear, skepticism, and the memory of leaders who were cut down when they dared to rise. For Traoré's supporters, his Moscow speech was not only a political statement, it was a declaration of survival. For his critics, it was a gamble that could isolate his country further. The climax of this story is therefore not just about what was said in Moscow. It is about the reactions it triggered at home and abroad. It is about ordinary citizens who see themselves in the fate of their leader and about foreign powers who see their influence slipping away. The stage is set for confrontation, and everyone knows that words alone cannot hold back the forces now in motion. The question that lingers is simple but heavy. Will this rising fire of resistance bring Burkina Faso security and dignity, or will it invite the kind of retaliation that once silenced Africa's boldest voices? The promises and declarations from Ibrahim Traoré's Moscow visit did not exist in a vacuum. They carried direct consequences for the daily lives of Burkinabè citizens and for the fragile political order of the Sahel. When a leader tells his people that billions of dollars will flow into roads, schools, and hospitals, expectations rise quickly. When he declares that their skies will soon be defended by advanced systems, fear and hope blend together in equal measure. For families across Burkina Faso, the immediate effect was emotional. A farmer in Bobo Dioulasso explained that he now dared to believe his children would one day ride on paved roads instead of walking for hours through mud during the rainy season. For decades, bad infrastructure had meant that harvests spoiled before reaching the markets. The promise of new roads offered not just convenience, but survival. A mother in Ouagadougou said she could not stop thinking about the hospitals Traoré described. Her sister had died in childbirth because no doctor or medicine was available. To her, the vision of modern hospitals was like hearing that tomorrow could finally be different. At the political level, Traoré's declarations strengthened his support among citizens who felt abandoned by past governments. His speeches framed him as a leader who stood with dignity, unlike those who accepted loans and conditions from Paris or Washington. Many young people began to see him as a symbol of sovereignty and self-reliance. This fueled a surge of national pride, and in the short term, it consolidated his authority. However, such bold promises also raised risks. Opposition voices argued that the nation was being tied too closely to Moscow. Critics within civil society asked whether Russia truly had the capacity to deliver on billions in investment while facing its own economic struggles. Others feared that leaning on Russia and China for weapons and capital could simply replace one dependency with another. The civil conversation in Ouagadougou became more polarized, with some viewing Traoré as a liberator, and others worrying he was gambling with the nation's future. Regionally, the consequences were even sharper. On January 29, 2025, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger formally withdrew from ECOWAS, the West African regional bloc. ECOWAS responded by leaving the door open for dialogue, but warned of instability. This step created a fracture in the region's political fabric and raised questions about the future of cooperation. For ordinary citizens, the withdrawal was not about legal texts, but about real concerns. Traders who once moved freely across borders worried about new restrictions. Families divided between Niger and Burkina Faso feared that travel would become harder. Regional students wondered whether their certificates would still be recognized across borders. Internationally, the West began to view the Sahel as a new front in global rivalry. Analysts in Washington warned that Russia's involvement in Burkina Faso could increase migration pressures, destabilize counterterrorism efforts, and reduce Western influence in Africa. European diplomats worried that if Putin or other Russian officials appeared in Ouagadougou, it would symbolize a decisive loss of prestige. On the other hand, some African leaders quietly praised Traoré for taking a stand. They saw in his defiance a mirror of their own frustrations with Western powers. The civil and political consequences also had a darker side. Expectations inside Burkina Faso rose faster than projects could be built. Infrastructure and hospitals take years, not months, to appear. If citizens did not see real change soon, disappointment could set in. History shows that when hope turns into frustration, instability often follows. Political opponents would be quick to exploit any delay. For older Americans watching this story unfold, it may feel familiar. During the Cold War, nations often aligned with either Washington or Moscow, hoping to secure aid and protection. Sometimes it led to progress, but often it led to cycles of dependency and disappointment. The stakes for Burkina Faso are similar. Will the promises of Moscow and the defiance of Traoré create a foundation for lasting dignity? Or will they lead to new struggles that burden ordinary families? The real test is not the applause in public squares or the speeches in Moscow. It is whether mothers see medicine, whether farmers see roads, and whether young people find jobs. The world now asks, will these promises turn into reality before patience runs out? Or will they ignite another storm of unrest? From Washington to Paris, the words of Ibrahim Traoré did not go unnoticed. In fact, his declarations were dissected in think tanks, parliaments, and newsrooms across the West. American analysts described his Moscow trip as a sign of Russia carving out new ground in the Sahel, a region long considered fragile but strategically important. For the United States, the Sahel is not simply another corner of Africa. It is a place where terrorism, migration, and the competition for influence can spill over into global security. For many in the U.S. defense community, the most alarming claim was about air defense. Even though no official confirmation exists that such systems were delivered, the very idea of a small African state declaring control over its skies with Russian technology raised questions. For decades, the assumption in Washington was that Western powers could fly unchallenged over the Sahel. If that reality changes, it complicates not only intelligence operations, but also any potential interventions. European capitals reacted with equal concern. France, once the dominant military and economic presence in West Africa, saw Traoré's words as part of a steady erosion of its influence. French media called him reckless, and French officials quietly admitted they feared a chain reaction. If Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger solidify ties with Moscow, other nations like Guinea or Chad might follow. In their view, the fire of resistance could spread, but the picture looks different when seen from Africa itself. Leaders in Mali and Niger have already coordinated with Traoré in the alliance of Sahel states. For them, this was not a reckless gamble, but a step toward sovereignty. Some even framed it as a long-delayed correction to decades of dependence on Western aid that came with conditions. For Americans watching this unfold, especially older generations who remember the Cold War, the parallels are striking. Once again, a region of the world becomes a stage where global powers compete. Once again, words like sovereignty, dignity, and independence are used to rally populations. The difference today is that the West no longer writes the rules alone. Russia is not only present, it is being welcomed by leaders who reject the old order. The question that remains is whether this realignment will lead to stability or whether it will ignite a wider crisis that pulls in powers far beyond Africa. The story of Ibrahim Traoré's Moscow visit is more than a headline. It is a turning point that carries both promise and peril. On one hand, there is the vision of new roads, schools, hospitals, and industries, that could finally give Burkinabè families the dignity they have long been denied. On the other hand, there is the danger that expectations will rise faster than reality, and that international backlash will follow. History tells us that Africa's boldest leaders, from Sankara to Lumumba to Gaddafi, often paid a heavy price for their defiance. That memory still hangs over Burkina Faso. The warning signs are clear. The Sahel is already one of the most unstable regions in the world. If investments fail to materialize quickly, frustration could erupt into unrest. If defense partnerships are perceived as a threat, powerful nations may seek to undermine them through sanctions, propaganda, or even covert action. The region could become not only a stage for local struggles, but also a battlefield of global realignment. For Americans who remember the Cold War, the echoes are unmistakable. This is not only a struggle for Burkina Faso's future, but for the balance of power between East and West. Yet beyond politics, this is a human story. It is about the farmer who hopes for a road, the mother who longs for medicine, and the child who dreams of a classroom with books. It is about dignity, survival, and the desire to live without fear. When Traoré says be ready, he is not only speaking to his people. He is reminding the world that freedom is never given freely. It is seized, defended, and passed down. So we are left with a question. Is Traoré the beginning of a new chapter of African sovereignty? Or is he leading his nation into greater danger? Will the billions he promises become the bricks of hospitals and schools? Or will they vanish into disappointment? The answer will shape not only Burkina Faso, but the entire Sahel. If this story has stirred something in you, take a moment to reflect. Ask yourself what dignity and justice mean in our time. Share your thoughts, because silence is also a choice. And may God bless all those who struggle not for power, but for the simple right to live free.